Hello, everybody, and welcome to Synapsis for this discussion on homelessness. We are very privileged to have a great panel today for you to interact with and hear from to speak about the subject. And to introduce myself, I am Solomon Iberta. I am the owner of Eureka Books here in Eureka, California. That is an applause line. And also, this topic's very personal to me also because when I first moved here in 1993, I got involved with a group called Food Not Bombs, and we were serving food to the hungry on the streets of Arcata, and of course, soon after got sued by the so-called liberal city council at the time, threatened with jail time for providing mutual aid to my neighbors. So thanks for that. It really did galvanize me and help me have a big perspective on what needs to happen, which is something more than just what we have been doing. As we can see, it still continues to be a problem. So enough about that. We've got a really great, fantastic panel here today, so I'm going to introduce all of them and then hand it off to Brian here. So on my left there, Leslie Castellano, of course, is the owner of Synapsis here and is on the city council of the city of Eureka. Leslie has been active in working on homeless issues for as long as I've known her, which is a very long time. Someone I just met here is Weather, and he's a local community activist doing mutual aid work with Hatcher and even out of the camps where he has resided, providing a great example of how people can take the power to solve the problems in our community with each other. Like Weather. And then to my left immediately is Nezzy Wade, the co-founder of AHA, which is Affordable Homeless Housing Alternatives here in Eureka. If you're here, you probably know that Nezzy is legendary. Going from the right side then there, we also have Ryan Hutson, who is an independent freelance journalist. Hutson, works with Red-Headed Black Belt, K-Mud, and others, and you've seen the work that Ryan has been doing on this topic for a while now. Next to Ryan is Lamonte Ford, who's a co-founder of the Wood Street Commons. Wood Street Commons is a collective of unhoused activists who work together to provide the same mutual aid and to find a way out of this problem. And we're very happy that he's here with us. And then to my immediate right is the author, the filmmaker, and author of Front Street, Brian Barth. I was very happy when Brian actually stopped by the bookstore and talked about his upcoming book and talked about how we could have an event, and we kind of got connected with Leslie and were able to bring it all together. So I feel like I'm surrounded by superstars up here. These guys are all just going to do some amazing work with you. And Brian will kind of break down what's going to be happening with the rest of the evening. So thank you all for coming. Oh, and let me say, I have books in the back. Brian's book, which is called Front Street, Resistance and Rebirth in the Tent Cities of Techlandia. I'm going to resist very hard to rant about this and instead just say, come buy a book. And special today, with tax, it comes to about $32, but tonight, if you have $30, I will sell it to you for that. How about that? So thanks so much for coming. Come chat with me at the book table, and come see the other fine folks who are tabling on the right who have been doing the work in our community to address the situation. But right now, I'll turn it over to Brian, who will tell you about the rest of the evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Solomon. Thanks for being the sort of first person to sign up for this event. It's come together so beautifully, in part at the last minute, and with all of you, all of these beautiful faces. You guys are part of it, and we we're going to talk a little bit up here first, but this is largely about us all talking together, not us talking at you. So thank you for coming and participating. So I was a journalist, am still a journalist, and I was covering Silicon Valley quite a bit for a few years back in the late 2010s. And it's very loud, huh?
Yeah.
Thank you. And, people were urging me, write a book. Like I was covering the companies, right? And all the scandals and social issues related to the tech industry. And I was like, I don't want to write a book about that stuff. It's just, I'm burnt on it, But why don't I write a book about the ordinary people of Silicon Valley, like, the cooks and the nannies and the landscapers and, the people working on the tech campuses, doing that kind of thing, and write about Silicon Valley from their perspective. And I knew that housing would be part of that story because it couldn't not be. It's the most expensive housing market in the country, and the people doing those jobs they're not making enough money to rent there, obviously. And but I had lived in California for a long time, and I had been back east for a long time, and I came back here to start working on this book project and installed myself in Cupertino, the heart of Silicon Valley, as they call it. And literally the first day, I had heard about this camp next to the Apple headquarters. This you may have seen pictures, or maybe you've seen it in person. This giant UFO spaceship-looking building, $5 billion building. I think it was the most expensive building on the planet when it was built. And I'd heard there was a camp basically next door to it, and being a journalist, I was like, that sounds like a story, and I was just up the street. So I walked over there, and I had never been in an encampment before in my life. I had never really interacted with unhoused folks. And I didn't know what to expect, to be honest. But what I've experienced changed the course of my life and became the subject of this book, and was something so profound and so moving just on a human level, and so clearly a story that was not being told in the media. Like from the first moment I walked in there, all of my ideas about what homelessness were sort of obliterated. And what I saw was really like an intentional community, a group of people living together with more or less common values, working towards a more or less common goal. And I really related to that. I had lived in intentional communities, and I was like, these are my people. And so, but that's not the story you hear in the media, of course, like at all. You hear two words, two phrases: drug addiction and mental health. And you hear them over and over and over and over and over. And so this book is really telling what I believe is the rest of the story that the general public has not been exposed to, because the average person does not go hanging out in homeless camps. And I found that there are kind of three really compelling narratives, that I wanted to share in the book. And the first one was like, these people have something of value actually for the rest of us. Like there's a sort of hard-earned wisdom that comes. That could not come from that experience, right? Because it's an experience that tests the core of your being, and if you survive it, it's like a rebirth process. People are reborn into wise and radiant human beings through that experience, and have wisdom to share. And one area of wisdom and knowledge that they have is what to do about homelessness. And so that was certainly not a narrative that I was hearing in the media. And that policymakers were talking about. We do have like policymakers who talk about lived experience, and they have like the token, lived experience person on their board of directors and all that, and that's great. But to really, really, listen deeply to those communities, like about what they want, what they need, what their dreams are. We don't necessarily ask those questions. We're like, put your name on this piece of paper, and go get in line for the institutional thing. But I think, the story of homelessness is so much more rich and interesting than that. And so that was kind of the starting point of this book, is like there's this disconnect between the sort of policy environment around homelessness and the media narrative around homelessness and the reality of homelessness, like just a profound disconnect. And everyone's asking the question, like, well, we're spending so much money, in California, billions and billions of dollars trying to fix this thing, and it seems to be getting worse. And why is that, And so, one of the first things that was just glaringly apparent was the sort of the front line of policy in relationship to the unhoused person's experience is the experience of being swept, of being forcibly removed from their home that they create on the street. And so that's like the primary kind of relationship that, many unhoused people have with their local governments, is this extremely antagonistic relationship. And so there's not a lot of trust. There's not a basis for like a good communication and healthy relationship between local governments and unhoused communities for that reason. And I think that has a lot to do with why the problem remains so intractable. And actually, I take that word back, not the problem, but the situation. So kind of, point one of the book is, why are we doing that? Why are we repeatedly inflicting trauma on individuals and communities who have experienced so much trauma, and essentially like pushing them down the ladder? Like we're demanding that they pull themselves up by the bootstraps while we're sort of pushing them down. Like if you can imagine, bulldozers rolling up to your house at 7 a.m. and knocking on your door and saying, you got 30 minutes to get out before we throw all your belongings into a dump truck and smash down your house with our bulldozers. That's what it is, that like you can't put, that's just the reality. So that's point one, and point two is what happens in these camps, in my experience, and I've spent time in many camps, and I focus on 3 in particular in the book that I found particularly compelling. But like I said, they're intentional communities, and people come together perhaps out of necessity to begin with, but like we're human beings, right? So bonds and relationships form, and people start building things. They create the infrastructure that they need to fulfill their daily needs, food and shelter and water. Like they get together, they figure out how to make it happen, and then there's the social infrastructure and these incredibly powerful bonds. If you're sharing such an experience like that with a group of people, it's you can imagine what that does, right? Like it's very powerful. And so that in itself is a wisdom that unhoused communities have to share, is the power of the interdependent community, the resource sharing community. And so naturally, one thing that those communities do is they come together to resist being swept, because they don't, it's like, they're like, stop that, like quit it. And in a group, they have a little bit more, voice, right? And so, they stage protests, they, contact city council, they contact the media, they do everything they can. And one thing about the sweeps is it tends to kind of undermine that community cohesion, right? Because people then get spread out. And so the communities that last the longest in one place, they tend to, they really grow into a village. But, when they're repeatedly swept on a monthly basis, let's say, just not the opportunity for that to happen. So one of the communities that I focused on in the book, Wood Street in West Oakland, where I met Monte, who is traveled up here today to be with us. That community existed for a long time. Informally, let's say for a decade, OPD was telling unhoused residents of Oakland, go down to Wood Street, we'll leave you alone. And so over time, just a lot of people ended up down there, and before you knew it, there's 300 people, and over time they really formed a political kind of outlook on their situation. They really became activists, and they really invited the housed community in, and so it became this blended housed unhoused community. And that's another big point of the book, is when you take away that barrier and you make it a little looser, like who's housed, who's unhoused, let's not worry so much about it. What I saw was the unhoused folks in that community, they really healed and moved forward in their lives through those relationships in a very profound way. And so if there's a solution out there, to me, that's it. And it's very organic and slow, and not, there's not necessarily a formal structure for it, on Wood Street in Oakland. This just happened. Nobody was like, hey, let's, apply for $1 million grant, and we're going to do this and this and this. It was just people. It was just neighbors helping neighbors. And so that was something very powerful. So I'm going to read a short section here about Wood Street to give you a little bit more of an idea, and then show a short video about Wood Street to really bring it to life for you. And then we're going to talk amongst ourselves. Thank you all. I met Monte on a July morning at his camp in Oakland, which stretched for a mile along Wood Street and bulged 100 yards back from the curb beneath a tangle of overpasses known as the MacArthur Maze. It was infamous among California's mega camps, a place news reports reference Mad Max to describe: mountains of junk, hard-looking dudes ambling about, and an incredible number of burnt-out cars. A Hollywood rendering of the apocalypse is an apt, if uncreative, means to explain Wood Street's outer appearance. But the news reports miss the seeds of Eden hiding in the dystopia and the tender hearts residing in the hard-looking dudes. The roughly 300 residents of the camp referred to the place, their home, as Wood Street Commons. I walked through the gates of Wood Street Commons to find a small outdoor stage where Monte sat on a canvas director's chair in a loose-fitting leather jacket, pink shirt, blue tie, and cowboy boots. Gathered around him was an assortment of fellow residents, housed friends of the camp, and a handful of city officials who looked rather uncomfortable. Several members of the media were present. A PA sat near the edge of the stage. Soft drinks and snacks were spread on a table as folks lounged about on couches waiting for the event to begin. The stage was backed with walls made from pallets, an IKEA bed frame, and other scavenged material. Shade came courtesy of white fabric strung loosely between crooked wooden poles, along with a forest green cafe umbrella with Starbucks printed on it in white letters. I spotted several hypodermic needles on the ground along with a dead rat. Propped on a table was a board displaying architectural plans that illustrated how the dystopia might be reorganized a bit to reveal the jewels within. The plans showed the locations of individual homesteads as well as community facilities, including a flea market, bike repair shop, office space, and the Moose Pit Cafe, located next to a shed belonging to a resident named Moose. All of this and more already existed, though very informally and largely obscured by the cluttered aesthetics of the place. Meals for 50 plus were prepared daily over a large fire pit. An adjacent pantry stocked dried goods and fresh fruits and vegetables, free for whoever needed them. Donated supplies, such as clothes and toiletries, were generally available. Solar panels had begun to replace the power cords that pirated energy from nearby streetlights. Communal water tanks, filled by a volunteer with a water truck, had relieved the need to tap illicitly into city supplies. A pair of steel shipping containers provided lockable storage, a critical step to stability, and a place where people were afraid to leave their possessions unattended for fear they would be pilfered. Security cameras and lighting had been installed in some corners of the camp. If a female resident needed an escort back to her place at night, a call went out on the camp's walkie-talkie network. To accommodate their many Zoom calls with the media, NGOs, and government officials, they built an outdoor conference room that included an orange and blue wall of padded fabric that made for a professional-looking video backdrop. The purpose of the event was to convince the city officials, who wanted to tear the camp down, to support the residents in developing the Wood Street Commons vision instead. The city had plans for 170 units of so-called affordable housing on the portion of the camp where we gathered, just a few steps away from Monte's handcrafted home, which had a small putting green in the yard and a mailbox that said 1707 Wood Street out front. 7 units of the city's proposed development were designated for homeless veterans and 6 for young adults exiting foster care. The majority were designated for households making 60 to 120% of Oakland's median income, which translates to an annual salary of roughly $75,000 to $150,000. The city's plan for the camp's residents was to move them into cubicle-like tiny homes inside a fenced lot down the street, where they would be lorded over by security guards and subject to a litany of rules governing their lives. The meeting was facilitated by Leah, a massage therapist who volunteered at the camp and could sometimes be found kneading her elbows into residents' backs. After she laid out the ground rules and time limits for each speaker, Brian Warwick, a housing coordinator with the city, explained that the $100 million development had been held up for 18 months because of the current situation with the site. Latonda Simmons, the assistant city administrator, struck a more conciliatory tone. "I want to recognize that everybody is frustrated with the city," she said, "and it's one of the reasons that we are here." The residents felt that this and all the shelter options promoted by the city had the same underlying problem. They were based on a way of thinking that did not reflect the values and needs, or even the basic dignity of the people they were designed to shelter. The residents weren't interested in submitting to the city's shelters and their wardens. They viewed this as a downgrade from their current living situation. "We're people, right? I mean, we really are," said Monte to the officials. The city's plans for the community felt like being forced into a category that does not fit for us, he continued. "This," he said, gesturing at the makeshift village that sprawled out from the stage, "is our category." Monte, a veteran, explained to the crowd that he once tried a housing program for unhoused veterans and it nearly killed him. He said the freedom and autonomy of his current living situation were essential to his mental health. "I'm claustrophobic," he said. "Don't put me in a box. I might hang myself." He was not exaggerating. So, I'd like to turn it over to Ryan Hutson, who is going to lead us in a conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you to our panelists for being here today. So first, Brian's book, Front Street. It's immersive, it's colorful, it's enlightening, but it's also balanced with a bit of self-reflection. And I think that that's important as we're dealing with this sensitive topic, right? So it was a great read for me, not because it was a familiar topic, but because the people in the story, can everybody hear okay? We're good? I felt like those were familiar characters and people that I've already come to know and have met before locally. And we're 300 miles from the Bay Area, but the common threads were abundant. So I'm excited for this conversation here locally. Before we open it up, we're going to have some questions for the panel here. And my first one, Brian, I wanted to start with you. So your book is really a rare glimpse into the elements of the human condition. It's not, and my take on it, I think it's fair to say it's fundamentally about community and not so much about homelessness as a condition. So more about people building something together under impossible circumstances is really how it comes through in the book. So I wanted to start by asking each of our panelists here, what does the concept of community mean to you? And I don't want the textbook explanation, right? I want, if you have a moment that stands out, or if there's something that you saw or felt and you said, this is really what community is, that's what I would like to hear for us to get started. Monte?
Okay. What community means to me, I can just tell you that it's like a bowl for me. It's something that holds me, it keeps me, it's something that I could lean on, I could pick it up and drink it. I was really at the pit of my despair when I met my community. I was there to commit suicide, and I was held up by all of the people that was suffering right there with me. So that's what community means to me.
Yeah, meeting Monte and all the different folks, that I met in the journey of writing this book, taught me, what community is, to be honest, because, when you're living that life with a career and just getting from point A to point B and being in a rush and busy and all that, you don't necessarily know your neighbors, but in a camp, you definitely know all of your neighbors intimately. And, I realized, for me, that was actually, those folks had something I didn't that was so valuable, immeasurably valuable. And, I think it's very simple. It's just about being present with the people around you as sort of your, having that high in your priorities as opposed to your own success in life, if you want to call it that, climbing the career ladder or whatever, sacrificing one for the other is really self-defeating and I think can leave you feeling, a little bit empty. Yeah.
Big question. I liked the concept, Monte, of a bowl, because we're all part of this thing we call community. And I really think, for me, it's the relationships and vesting in the people. And I appreciate the fact that we have a lot of institutional arrangements that make it possible for us to get the kinds of things that we need, like power and water and all that stuff. But I have had experience of being in camps, and the value of that to me was made really clear. I was going in there a lot, and it was in all times of day and night, and sitting with people. There were things that were really important, that were fundamental to how they held things together, that were important. Being together. And everybody had their jobs and things to do, like we all have our jobs and things to do. But there were the water bearers, there were the cooks, there were the mechanics, the people who did all those different things and pooled their resources, and somebody went shopping and somebody did something else. But when things were needed, they arrived. They just happened that way. And I once lost my phone that has my life and everything I do in it. And I retraced all my steps. I did everything I could to try and find my phone. And I was out going over the next day over the same places, and somebody said, "What are you looking for?" And I said, "I lost my phone somewhere." They said, "Hold on." They made a couple of calls, and they said, "We got you." And they said, "Go to this motel, go to that door." And then I went there, and they said, "Go here and go there. We got your phone." And they have their backs. And that's, it's however it works. Community is what facilitates, I guess I should say, the relationships that people have, the interrelationships that people have, and the nature of, basic concept of interdependence that are familial and essential to the dynamics of community and how community happens. And I was called mama, I was called aunt, I was called sister, I was called everything in the world, because that's how people feel about you being with them or being in community.
For me, community is, I look at it like this. I look at it as like a lot of things in the world are isolating and about like putting us in groups or putting us as as an individual. Community is how we come together beyond those barriers, beyond those layers of things that keep us apart. It's when we come together and like make decisions together, build things together. It's like, it's the togetherness. That's what community is the unity, the togetherness. It's not isolation. So it's not surprising that a bunch of people that are isolated for different reasons, maybe even from their own families, maybe from resources, from basic needs like shelter, water, it's not uncommon to think that through that isolation, they would find a common place to be and like common ways to come together and like unify through that isolation. So I feel like, it's a natural thing that we're getting back to. Not that it's something that's new or that like it's being invented, but we always used to live in tribes and like in communities, like that were very close-knit. We ate together, we celebrated together, like our lives were way more intertwined and connected and way more of a community. And like through the detachment and isolation, like we've lost a lot of that. And it's a need that's so ingrained in our like basic psychology, in our like basic needs, like the socialness of, we are social animals. Like we're not supposed to be isolated. We're not supposed to feel shut off. Those are times of danger. That's when like you can be a danger to yourself in those situations. You don't need anybody else to be dangerous for you not to be able to be dangerous to yourself or to make bad decisions on your own. So I think that it's just the process of us coming together. And it doesn't always look the same way. It doesn't always like appear the same way. It's not going to always be the same people. Like within a community, there's going to be sub-communities and subgroups, and like that's naturally going to take place. But it's when we get past the division and come together that we create community.
I think I'm kind of soaking in what everyone said. I feel like community is something that I'm often kind of defining and redefining, and it's a learning process for me. I think lately, part of being in community is to like feel like with my body, and, you know, and my thinking, the complexity of different people's needs and struggles, and try to understand as much as I can about that complexity. And then, you know, I'm in a very privileged space in many ways, in that I sit in government for the rest of this year. And so to, you know, sit with that complexity and try to really think about what can I do, what can I kind of do to be in relationship to that in a way that creates the possibility for more freedom and care in our world here in Northern California. You know, I do think that it's a joy and delight to be a human, you know, to be alive, and to like, I think there's a responsibility to kind of honor that in each person, you know, whether they, you know, who, for sure Eureka-centric, you know, in Eureka or, you know, in the surrounding area, and but to also kind of like be in the struggle and tension and not shy away from it. And, you know, it's not, and I think it's a learning process to try things, to reflect on them, to bring other people into that reflection, and to create change together. So hopefully we can continue to create more opportunities for, you know, joy and care for everyone. But it's also to be with the struggle.
Okay, I know that was a big one. So because the book talks a lot about the encampment communities, and within that, there are various stories of broken trust, elements of rupture in people's lives in different ways, right? So in thinking about how the elements of community can come together in an encampment, it's important to think about how trust can make or break a situation, right? And we see that often when there are police interactions at encampment sites. That's one of the first examples that comes to mind for me. But I'd like to hear from anybody who wants to pipe up about this. Was there a moment that you restored trust, or a moment that sticks out where trust was broken? And what do we do about that?
Okay. It's another complex question. I guess for me, while being homeless, we asked the city to account for the money that was allocated for us. And they could not give us the accountability for where all those millions of dollars were going. It's still to this day, they still haven't been able to provide that information to us. So that's when it was broken with me.
You want to grab that?
So about trust issues, got some of those, especially with police, like, and from somebody who's been arrested 39 times in 6 months by the Arcata Police Department, twice by the Eureka Police Department in that same span, for things like possession of a shopping cart, which like ultimately led me to be put on probation. It's as simple as like, not every officer is the same. Like this is true. Like it takes one officer to make a bad encounter with somebody to ruin it, basically, for any other officer who might actually be trying to like be positive or engage in a positive way. At this point, I think most of those bridges are burnt. So like it's not ever going to be the police that we can use to intermediate these situations, because we're just adding trauma and we're asking people to have like no experience in helping somebody in such a way to like do these things. It's outside of what police should ever be used for. It's a waste of resources. And it's just perpetuating the problem. So the trust isn't necessarily that all police are bad, is that it only takes one bad encounter with one police officer for all police officers to be basically look too much alike to be able to differentiate how this person is going to handle the situation. So we need community members, we need professionals, we need resources, like people that are actually there to engage people for the right reasons, to be the ones making these engagements. It should never be the police, like ever. Like there's no reason that the police should ever be there unless there's a dangerous situation. Police need to be there. I don't know who raises their children to be like, call the police, they're the heroes, they'll save the day. Most of the time when somebody does that, somebody ends up in a bad situation. A lot of times it's avoidable. You don't need the police to interact with each other. I encourage people to interact with each other and to be able to interact with your neighbors and your community without calling the police for reasons they don't need to be there. So just outside of, if we want to start to build trust, we have to go about this in a way where we don't expect or put on police officers to do things they're not qualified to do, and to put them in situations where they're just, I mean, it's just not going to work. It never will. So it's up to community, like it's up to us as a community to come and intervene in these situations. It's up to us to do cop watch when we see people being engaged with the police, to be somebody there as a witness, to make sure the police are doing their job right. It's important, like more than you might know. And that's where I think the trust is really gone forever at this point. And we need to engage this in a way where police officers are not the way that we're doing this.
I think, thank you. We've been saying this, AHA has been saying this for a really long time. Everything that we have essentially centers the police in their approach to our unhoused population. And it's been a scene of erosion for a really long time. For me, as a community member, trust is really important. And I think it goes into community to all of us as members of the community. It's hard to open up and to be willing to know unhoused people if you haven't done that. And one of the things that we had for hopes with our mobile shower program was that we would have people who would be volunteers in the communities where we operate, be meeting and connecting with the people who are in those communities that are not housed. So we have actively unhoused people that are in our program, providing services too. They both get and give services. But I think there's got to be ways that are, we have to break down barriers and find some way for us all to come together. We have this thing the second Saturday of every month called the Community Conversation. And we want people to come and participate in that. It's open to the whole community. We want our unhoused community members to come, but it's really hard for people who have not had a good experience to want to put out the effort to come. So we have to welcome and help them get there and do things where we have to show up. We have to show up when they want us to be there too, when they need us to be responsive. So that can be a whole array of things, but if you don't know it, or you're not talking to anybody, or you can't hear that, and it doesn't come into you, because you're not going to get it in the media much. So connect with people who can help segue those relationships into actual valuable resource.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is, perspective. A lot of people naturally ask, well, like if all these things that the government is doing don't seem to be making homelessness better, don't seem to be resolving homelessness, what should be done? And, and which is a very important question, and one that I spent a lot of time reflecting on in the book. But I think, one answer to that, because of this lack of trust, profound lack of trust, not just with the police, but with local government in general, is it, I think rather than the government, bringing in massive top-down solutions, which are expensive and don't necessarily work that well, this idea of the urban acupuncture, like small little influxes of resources designed to stimulate things moving in a certain direction. I think that the top-down solutions just don't. Some of them have their place for sure, but like to imagine that that's the whole picture of what is needed, I think is very short-sighted. And I think organizations like AHA and that most communities have these groups that are like mutual aid based groups that really have relationships of trust with unhoused communities to funnel resources to those groups to do more of the work rather than into entities that don't have the trust, and I think because rebuilding that trust is like almost a generational project. Like it's not going to happen next year, so.
Could I just say one more thing? Oh, sorry. I think that's an important point, and I also think this always happens, and I don't know, I was opening up and being better at this. Trust is a big thing too, because we're not trusted by government. We're not trusted, our organization isn't trusted by government. They're highly suspect of us because of what we speak, the messages that we give. And we speak truth, our truth, but also at the tables where we have conversation that are about what to do with resources. Rarely are our unhoused people present in those conversations. And at every meeting I go to, they should be here. They should be here. So it's really important. Yeah.
It's challenging. I'm just reflecting on my own experience and sitting here from being outside of government, working in spaces, kind of, I would say maybe more shoulder to shoulder, amongst like NESI and, people addressing homelessness, to then being, getting elected. And for sure, addressing homelessness is probably the main reason I ran for city council, was because I was really actively involved with quite a few different causes. There were other reasons, but that was one of the driving factors. To then kind of being inside and and lately I've been reflecting a little on what will my life be now after this experience, and I do think that there is the capacity to have real person-led relationships with government, or at least for sure, I'm now super biased, but I do think that there's space to have a government that isn't top down, that is like
Democracy,
exactly, that is like acting from the will of the people. And I think that there's I'm hopeful to create more opportunities and to participate in more opportunities where we can really think about what are the policies we want and the systems we want, and how do we bring those forward in a meaningful way. And I think it requires a lot of long-term dedication, and deeply appreciate the people in this room who have been involved with causes for a long time. But I think here, more than almost any place, there is some capacity to actually have a responsive government. And I don't think that because I have these experiences and I'm in the scene I deserve your trust, or I deserve someone else's trust, right? I think that all of that is made day by day over time, and that it's really about committing to being in relationship to one another and continuing to work on issues, and to I would say like respectfully call in or not so respectfully call in. But, you know, I think often when people perceive government as the problem, it also takes away a lot of opportunities for change. Because, you know, whether we like it or not, we are investing resources, large amount of resources into government. And so I think like that's, you know, there is the capacity to build partnerships and also to, you know, engage with resistance at the same time.
I just wanted to speak on another like trust issue that we haven't really talked about, and that's the process. Now the process might be a little bit different for every situation, at least it should be different for every situation and on an individual basis, but the process of going through a program or, you know, filling out the paperwork and navigating resources can easily make a person lose faith, trust, or any type of like of that even being the answer. I deal with it all the time where a person is I've tried that. I've tried housing. I've been on waiting lists. I'm still waiting on HUD. I'm still like, the process is a lot of the problem, and we need to make the process very simple. Are you a human? Yes or no, not like it shouldn't be about pronouns, it shouldn't be about your race, it shouldn't be about your religion or what you believe in. Are you a human being? Do you need things? If we're supposed to be providing them as we have this money to provide these things for you, how do we do that without it coming down to anything other than you're just a human and need these things? Like, and how easy can we make it for that person to obtain these things? Not difficult, like how do we make it to where it's a failed process where a lot of the people trying this situation are going to fail to go through the entirety of the process to actually get any of the resources. Like, we need to make these processes easier. And like, we need to rebuild trust in the process that like somebody can, because if you see somebody go through the process that, hey, they were out here with me 6 months ago. Now look at them. They got a place. They're doing great. They're active, you know, look at them. Wow, that's great. They see that. You don't think they notice that? So it's when they see, oh, I'm trying, and nope, didn't work again. And that's the story. Like, we have to shift the narrative, like the proof is in actually doing this, like having people go through the process. So make the process easier so that we can see people going through the process. That will naturally bring people through the process with them. But it's the loss of the faith and the trust in the process for people to even try to engage and go down that road. Like it makes it harder for resources in this process. Because if somebody doesn't have faith, they're not going to put out the effort that it takes to go through it. And if we require too much effort of them, then yeah, it's a failed. Like we failed just as much as they did by not putting in the effort, because like we should know that the effort is something they can't put into it, or maybe have the capacity to put into it.
He said your thing. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I just was going to add one other thought, which is, policymakers are elected, and I think a big issue is that, people voting for their local officials don't have great information, and historically it's the media's job to provide that information, right? And so, as an example, I didn't focus on local government in the book. I deliberately wanted to shift the focus in a different direction. But I did recently, after the book was published, I reached out to different local government officials in the Bay Area, including the director of housing for the city of San Jose, who has homelessness as part of his, portfolio of responsibility. And we met, and he was very cordial, and he was like, I completely agree with everything you're saying, but my hands are tied, is what he told me. And he said, my hands are tied because the elected people, who are his bosses, don't give him the latitude to operate differently. And the bosses of the elected people are the voting people, right? And so, but unfortunately, the trend, in public perception is going in the direction of like, make the homeless people disappear by any means necessary. That is the general vibe, and it's become more intense in the 5 years that I worked on this book. And, I'd like to point out, like, making homeless people disappear, like, kind of means there's three possibilities, like indoors, in a grave, or in a jail. And so I think, we as citizens, and maybe not everybody in this room, but just collectively, when we're demanding of our public officials, because people call the city, and I mean, they like call and call and call, and the sweeps are really pushed by people calling and complaining, neighbors calling and complaining, being like, get rid of these people. But we have to recognize when we're saying that, or even if we're not overtly saying it, when our actions demonstrate that, like really that's a grave, a jail cell, or a house. Like that's where those are the three options of where they could be if they're not camping on the street in your neighborhood.
Well, you just perfectly segued into my next question, so thank you for that. In my own local reporting here locally and interviews I've done, something that really sticks out to me, and I try to remember to pose this inquiry to people who are living outdoors, and it's the concept of out of sight, out of mind, right? So I've been told two things. I've been told out of sight, out of mind is not good for anybody. That sort of fosters invisibility, isolation, and neglect for people who are homeless and don't want to be, or for people who just need services, right? Anything. People who are lacking community, right? The other response that I get sometimes is that out of sight, out of mind is sort of one of the few ways that people living homelessness get any peace. And I know that might be confusing for people, but I'm hoping that you can help us understand that.
Yeah, I'm going to answer the second part of that.
Yeah.
Because I was homeless for 12 years, and it was being shunned from society is the reason why I ended up in the encampment in the first place, because it was people that was like-minded with me, people that was suffering along with me. And it empowered me. It gave me peace. Like you said, I felt like, this is my brother right here. And let me have some bread, man. That's what it did for me.
I guess. All right. So just repeat the first part of the question for me.
Yeah. One take on
The out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, out of sight, out of mind. The first take I get probably most often, and from people doing mutual aid, from service providers, is it's not good for anybody. That it fosters isolation and it's unhealthy for people, right? To try to disappear people is wrong, they would say. And then the other perspective is, well, that's the only piece I get is when I'm not being scrutinized, essentially. So sometimes being out of sight and out of mind is preferred because then people are able to live the way they are comfortable.
So there's a lot of layers to that. So the out of sight, out of mind approach from the city's perspective, or like city government's perspective, is that if we can keep them away from the NIMBYs, then we won't get complaints as much. So like if people don't have to see it, then they don't engage with us trying to get rid of it. Also, it's an eyesore to the community, as that's the way that they're looking at the situation. So in and of situations like with the encampment, in the example, like in multiple encampments that we have here, it's the police literally saying, okay, well, you guys can go over here for now. It's out of sight, it's out of mind. If you go over here, we won't bother you. It never lasts. It never lasts. And so you get these communities started up that are out of sight, out of mind, until, oh, we have a development project that's going to go there, or that's actually, and so typically it's code enforcement, and like that's how these things come about. It's if it was out of sight, out of mind, and really not bothering anybody, then it would be up to the city to leave it alone. But no, they come into who owns this property? All right, well, you got to do something about this, or it's going to start costing you money. So that's like, because they don't actually, as a city, have leverage to come in and remove anybody from something that's not city property. It's not their responsibility. So it becomes a responsibility to put pressure on that person to make this out of sight, out of mind go away. Like, it's still going to have to exist somewhere. People don't literally disappear unless they die. They're still, even if they're in jail or housed, they're still there. They still exist. So it's really important. This is out of sight, out of mind. We realize what perspective we're coming from. Are we coming from the city or the outside community from that community? Or the out of sight, out of mind from somebody in that community is privacy. I mean, if I have to live on a sidewalk with people coming back and forth and they're casting judgment at me every chance I look, and getting somebody looking down on me because I'm right here in their vision, then I have no privacy. Like, I have no, where do I change my clothes? Like, if they take my tent and I don't even have a tent and I only have a blanket, hopefully, to sleep on, like, how do I change my clothes? Like, how do I bathe? How do I like take care of my hygiene? How do I do these basic human things without privacy? So it's privacy. So like, there needs to be, I mean, we have doors at our house when we have houses. We have shades on our windows, like for that same reason. Even though we're indoors, we like our privacy at times, or sometimes we're like let's open it up and let's let the neighbors hear our music. But like, for the most part, that privacy is something that's a human need. We need that privacy. We need to be able to change our clothes and take care of our hygiene without the whole world being right there to see. So like, out of sight, out of mind comes to privacy. There's a basic need for privacy for obvious reasons. And so they need to have privacy, whatever that is or however that looks. But the out of sight, out of mind, that's maybe the only place they can get it. Because like, they have to hide to do it. You have to hide. Think about that as a concept. Not having a place to go have your own privacy. Having to find somewhere to hide to have your own privacy. And then knowing that in isolation, if you're hiding somewhere, you might be vulnerable. That's where being in a group or in a community is like, well, shoot, at least I know that somebody's going to care if they hear me scream. You know what I mean? Like, that's where it comes in. You get people in these communities that become shepherds. You realize, oh, these are the veterans. They stand up right away and they're like, oh, we'll protect everybody here. These are my people. I'll die for these people. This is what I'm here for. You'll have people that are like, oh, I can cook. I'm going to cook for everybody. I love cooking. You know what I mean? You'll have people we end up with daycares and everything you could imagine in these situations if they're let to develop.
Yeah, go ahead, yes.
So the real question should be, what do you do with the encampments? And there's so many things that they can do. They can give wraparound services to these communities that are already thriving, and out of sight, out of mind them that way. Give us resources and we'll stay out of sight, out of mind. Give us land and we can be out of sight, out of mind. But without those resources, it's not going to work.
Okay. Nezzy or Leslie, from a policy perspective, from engagement perspective, anything?
Well, sort of. One of the questions that was posed to me recently in a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce was the business district is absolutely exhausted by having people in their doorways and on the streets and having to pick up after them and everything else. And, you know, everybody has to live in community. Everybody deserves to be in community. How do we do this? What can we do that will make it possible for people to live together? And, you know, there are a lot of things that we could do.
No doubt.
Seriously, we could provide restrooms, and we could provide garbage places, we could provide open spaces, we could provide rest areas, we could provide a lot of different things that we don't now do, rather than just leave people languishing on the sidewalks. So as far as what can be done and existing encampments, how remote they are or how close in they are or whatever it is, there is so much that we can do. But it really is about just deciding you want to do it and then making the leaders appropriate the resources to make that happen. And there are a lot of resources that have been invested in issues around homelessness, particularly in the cities, and the enforcement. If we spent the money on the people that we spend on sweeping and code enforcement and all of those things, we would have a vastly different situation.
We would still have some money left over.
Say that again?
We would still have money left over,
Yeah,
actually.
We would. We would.
Okay. I want to check in.
Can I just add something?
Sure, quick.
Like one simple way that we could make it a lot, like one way to start is allowing people safe parking, the right to park in their own space. Like, you know, just the autonomy that if I'm in my own vehicle, I'm not going to be harassed by the police. My vehicle isn't going to be taken from me, and I'm not going to lose all of that. If we could just allow people to exist in ways that they already have basic amounts of shelter without taking that, that's a huge situation. People that are car camping or have some sort of a shelter, get that taken as soon as possible because of the way that the cities are enforcing car camping. And it could also, these could be our tourists that we're harassing that just came to van camp for a weekend at the beach, you know what I mean? Like, so this pressure that we're putting on people, like, is needless, and like that should be one of the first things that we change, is allow people to just be without going out of our way to harass them. Yeah. Like, and I think that's an important first step. And then trash and sanitation. We should, if an encampment already exists, what would it be to literally, with the amount of funds that go through our cities, to say, oh, we could put a few porta potties in the dumpster there. Simple.
In the same way, this has been going on a long time. And in the amount of time that I've been on the streets with people, I have seen so many vehicles, RVs, destroyed, vehicles taken away. And the really difficult part about that is it's because they aren't registered, or it's because they don't have a working toilet or whatever. We have the ability, the technology, the know-how to address what people need to be able to achieve stability in the ways that they're living, rather than trying to demand that people live the way that we want them to in order to have access to resources and housing or shelter.
Thank you for that. So another thing that's prominent concept in the book, one of my favorite things, is you talk about this spark, right? And my impression is that it's something, it's not just hope, but it's like an individual's power and their pride, and it's almost like this electric, a spark, right? And I've seen that in Humboldt too. I know there's a spark in every encampment, I'm sure of it, at least a few. But the question for the panel, what do we do with the spark? How does a community not waste the spark or energy from the spark, right? And then beyond that, how can the outside community recognize that spark, and how can that be used in a proactive way?
Well, first, the spark is like a rebirth. It's energy. It's electrifying. And it's easy to see. And somebody is really destitute, really down low, and he's smiling for something. Something happened in his life to make him smile at his worst moment of his life. You see a makeshift garden coming up in one of the encampments. That's part of the spark. You see housed and unhoused together, bonding, doing great things together. That's evidence of the spark. This spark it's life, it's why I'm still here. It's what created me again.
Yeah, Monte is where that phrase came that I mention in the book and chose as the title of the film because it, all these policy discussions are so important, but at the end of the day, it's human life and it's the spirit, and that spark is something we actually all have in common, and sometimes life experiences, have a way of revealing or strengthening that spark or bringing it out, between different people. And, one way that I find the spark personally is by connecting with people from really different life experiences than myself. Like that's just something that brings me alive. And that was certainly part of my experience, being in the camps. That's all I have to say about the spark.
I have a really good example. We have some models of things that we would share with people, like, this is just an idea, but if you were going to have to come together in a space, do you know who you'd want to live with? And they all do, because they have their community. They have the people that they care about and that they want to support and who support them. So we have these models of tiny house village and safe, sanctuary camp and those kinds of things, or safe parking to start out with. But when we had community conversations for 2.5 years with the people that were encamped in Eureka, and they would come and every month we'd sit down and we'd talk about, well, here's how would you like to live here? And if you had a conflict, if this happened, how would you resolve that? We had some great conversations, but the best conversation we ever had was we were having the graduate engineers from HSU work with us on designing one of the tiny houses to be the most energy efficient, sustainable, affordable, all of those things. And they said it was theoretical though, because we didn't have a village where we could actually do this, but we were building a house that they were working on. And I said, well, look, let's get together. They go, we don't want to do something that people aren't going to want to use, or we don't want to do it. We don't want to do it if people aren't going to, if it's not going to work. So I said, well, let's just all get together. So we got a bunch of people who were out and encamped to come meet with us. And I told them, I said, bring your creativity and your devices, whatever. And they did too. And they sat down and they started talking about, I've watched people create light out of nothing. It's just so creative, so much energy out there, so many sparks, right? And when they got together, they just were sparking off of each other. Like, have you ever tried this? Yeah. What happens when you... And it was just like for 2 hours of this incredible conversation, and everybody was so enriched by it, and it really was a wonderful experience. But it takes getting together to utilize that spark. So it's wonderful.
I'd like to kind of give an example of how I feel that spark exists within all of us. We just kind of lose it, or it reignites. It's like it is an ember, or it's a flame, based on where you're at the time. So I think that we all have a light. Sometimes it's smoldering. Sometimes it gets ignited. You just breathe into it, it's fire. I would just like to say that I've traveled all over the world. I've been blessed in a way that I've been able to travel and experience a lot of different cultures and communities all over the world. And one thing that I've kind of always found interesting in my own, we all perceive things differently, but some of the most talented, truly talented and amazing artists and musicians are on the street. like they're homeless, like starving artists. It's a thing. It's been a thing since art's been a thing, probably. And the most talented people that are musicians, poets, like, I mean, some of the poetry I've heard from, like, I've seen people you would think this person just rolled out of a bush, couldn't possibly jump on a piano and play Mozart. You know what I mean? Like, you don't know the background of these people. Like, you really don't until you actually engage with them. And you'll find that some of them are the most talented and, like, just beautiful, blessed people in ways that will never feed them. You know, like, being an artist, being super talented, being a musician, being super talented doesn't ever mean that that's going to be your way into anything. But that's still who you are. And, like, I find that we all are talented and have, like, all these different things. It's different for everybody, but, like, when you get people together, you start to see these things come out. And I feel like, yeah, like, there's just no, like, anywhere I've gone in the world, like, some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard was on the street. Some of the most beautiful and talented artists that I've ever seen, blown me away, are on the street. So it's not that we're not dealing with a population that is incapable, like, by any means. Like, they're very gifted and very beautiful, very talented people. They're just need the ability to live and exist, like, without pressure on them, and do it their own way. I think a lot of it is just that, like what Nezzy was saying, is we can't come up with ways to change this to make people live in a way we want them to live. We need to embrace the way they want to live and help better them on that path. It's like, it's not for me or anyone to say what's right or wrong for anyone else. That's freedom. Like, we need to embrace freedom. If we want to be in a free country, we need to allow people to be free in their own way. No doubt. Yeah. Oh, and we probably would do a lot better if we got rid of some of the corrupt government officials. I'm not going to name names, or I told Nezzy I wouldn't fire shots, but, you know, we know who they are.
We can talk later. First, I just want to shout out to Zora Neale Hurston's book, Their Eyes Are Watching God, which has an incredible passage about the spark of humanity, and just want to, in honor of her and Juneteenth, lift up her work. If you haven't read it, give it a read. And then also to Gabby and Caroline from Outer Space for, you know, I feel like the work that y'all are doing with supporting artists is just so amazing, and in terms of really nurturing that spark. So thank you, and of course to all the artists and other people who are making, right? It's not alive if people don't show up and come make art. So thank you for that. You know, and just to earlier, I didn't speak about the idea of privacy, but everyone deserves privacy. I think we should continue to work on a safe parking space. So let's talk about it. You know, it's come up. We've talked about it. I don't think there's not a no, but we haven't gotten there yet. So I just want to say I think there's ongoing conversations to be had. You know, and there is real tension over the commons. Just, you know, and that tension is something that is some of it's systemic in nature, in just terms of like the kind of consolidation of wealth, and that we're now, you know, like kind of fighting for like what we imagine like living a good life to be. And, you know, people have different senses of what that is, and it creates a lot of tension on our streets and in our communities. And, you know, not to say that, you know, the global injustices sort of like write us a pass, you know, from the work we do here, but that I think there's a lot more opportunity to come together in terms of addressing that. But also just that, you know, there is a real tension that exists in terms of just, you know, oh, and I thought, not, I mean, this isn't totally on me, but Portland Lou 24-hour bathroom is coming back before City Council sometime before I'm off. So please show up in support of such a thing, and give input into it. You know, in terms of the spark, yeah, I love what you said, that we all have it, and you know, I think there's so many false narratives around people on the street that sort of people see these stories and cliches and don't actually see the people. And also there are times in which the street and the instability and the turmoil and the fear also kind of like take away someone's spark. You know, I definitely have had friends who have deeply struggled with the instability of being unhoused and have, you know, experienced like pain and suffering, not inherently through being unhoused, but through the kind of larger conditions around it. And, you know, if there were sort of like quick answers, I think we would have done them already. I like to think we would have, you know, and, you know, I think, Nezzy, you bring up a really good point of like, how do we get more voices in positions, you know, in these conversations that are, you know, around like positions of power. And I think that's something that like we can and should continue to work on in terms of really acknowledging like the power of lived experience. And
That's really being acknowledged, the brain trust that's there, and all of the capability that we've been talking about doesn't ever be brought to the table to be acknowledged for what that is, or rarely that rarely happens. And so I hope we work on that. I hope we do that a lot, and I hope for everybody who's interested in being part of the conversations that you'll come to the community conversations we have on the second Saturday of every month at the Labor Temple, because it's open to everybody. And it takes a commitment to do that. It's ongoing. So you can't make it every time, but you should make it some of the time so that we can keep the conversation going.
Speaking of that, should we open it to the room?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Yes, we do want to transition to questions from the audience. If anybody has thoughts, I just want to plant a seed here because I had one last question, really two last questions, but I'll only plant one seed now. So as we transition to audience questions, just want you guys to think about, you know, the spectrum of needs inside any encampment is as diverse as any spectrum of needs in any neighborhood, right? So what does it look like to build that vision on the ground? If we put people in charge of their own destiny and their own situation, what does that really look like? And with that, let's do some questions from the audience. Thank you so much.
I have lived unhoused before for a short period of time in my life, and it was a car camping situation where I had to be really conscientious and careful of the people around me so that I could stay safe and relatively unseen and private for my safety. And I have family members who are suffering with mental disabilities and unhoused and have been for most of my life. And I worry for their safety too. But also, I think something that should be brought to the table is the safety of housed people as well. There is a certain aspect of fear and trust from the other side of distrust for the safety of the other side too, and how we can work on building that up too, and where is the accountability in those communities for people, you know, being respectful of everybody else's needs, not to be causing a ruckus or making yourself a nuisance to other people. I have that responsibility as a person, and I think everybody should respect that responsibility. So what does accountability look like in this situation to you?
Can I answer that? So in our encampment, first let me say, remember, as homeless people, we're trying to be invisible. Let me say that first. So we don't want the garbage out there. We don't want the needles out there. We don't want anything that's a blemish upon us. Do we want there? In our encampment, we tried to pay for trash services because there were some of us that are higher functioning than the other ones. And so we had money, we had jobs, and we were denied those things. But I do agree with you wholeheartedly that the garbage and the safe conditions could considerably be changed. It's always been a battle for us in our encampment to try to keep it clean. And it was, trust me, it was an everyday thing. I was out there with the push broom every day, trying to get the housed neighbors to come in. You know, we wanted it to be inviting for them so that they could see that we're normal people. And I also believe that communication, like these meeting rooms that we're in, like right now, are the catalyst of bridging those two gaps.
Yeah, I mean, just dialogue, I think, is the most important thing, is face-to-face communication, you know, because it's so easy to other people if you're not talking with them, and it's so easy to deny people's humanity if you're not relating to them, you know, and I think that happens, it's so easy, I think that we all do it to a certain extent, but just the more we can just, you know, put things aside, judgments and whatever notions, and just talk to people who look different or seem different or scary, heaven forbid, you know?
I think it's important to point out that, like, it's the human condition. Like, we're all human, and like whether you're housed or not. I mean, how many people, maybe yourself included, I'm not speaking for anybody else, but I am saying that, like, we all have our struggles. Like, mental health is a very real struggle. Addiction is a very real struggle, which is a mental health issue, by the way. And so just you could be a millionaire and you could have lots of problems, be depressed and struggle and kill yourself and like all these things. Like, just imagine having whatever problems you have as a person that's housed. Now try to deal with that with all of the survival that you would have to deal with on top of it. So it doesn't change. It's not different issues that people are dealing with, and they're not different people. You just have to add survival to whatever a regular person might be dealing with. Like, and it's going to be the same issues across the board.
There was one thing that you said in your book that, I don't know, I just thought about it an awful lot. And it was a real simple statement, like, how many of you have ever had trauma that you haven't been able to recover from? And that's a perspective that we sort of just blow past, because people that are unhoused are traumatized and re-traumatized, especially with sweeping over and over and over again. So there's no getting out of that.
It's surprising how many common grounds you could find if you start that engagement. Like, you'll find so many kindred people. Trust me.
If you want, put your hands up high so Solomon can see you. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for being here. My first question is speaking of common grounds, what are some things that we can be doing to engage in common ground between myriad of communities that are not necessarily about resources and services, but are just a level playing field to see, I'm just like you, you're just like me. This is how we're all human, and we can be together, safely together, and we don't have to be so ostracizing and afraid of each other. And another thought that eats at my brain, and I just cannot figure this one out for the life of me, is so I personally have lived in my car for the last 6 years, and I love it. It has been a choice. It is my choice of lifestyle, and a social aspect that I have encountered countless times is if I tell another person that I live in my car, and I have for the last 6 years, the instant reaction is, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm really praying you find somewhere soon. Have you been on this list? But if I tell someone, oh, I live in my van, and I have for the last 6 years, all of a sudden that's so cool. How do you do it? I would love to do that. Where does this disconnect come from? Why is that a thing in people's minds? What happened?
Is there anybody?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and that I reflected a lot on that because like I wrote in the book how when I was like 21 years old or something like that, and a college student, I chose to live in the woods on campus under a tarp, just because it reflected my values. I was like into just simple living and a spiritual lifestyle, and there were like lots of students living in the woods at UCSC, and there was sort of a spectrum of choice and necessity among that population, and I was definitely on the choice side. But there have always been nomadic populations, and we have often celebrated and embraced those historically. I did a lot of research about the history of homelessness, and for example, 100 years ago in this country, the hobos, and the tramps were vilified on the one hand, but they're actually also celebrated on the other hand, like, the romanticized, and historically back, in Europe anyways, there was this history of, traveling musicians and, things like that, and the Roma people, and, all these different kind of subcultures of people that just don't fit in with our kind of current way of, living and working. And I think that should be celebrated, and not, maligned, and much less criminalized. And yeah, I just also wanted to speak to your question. I think that's the crux, really, of the whole disconnect between the housed and the unhoused communities, is that sense of like, who are those people, and am I safe around them? Because we maybe observe behaviors that are frightening to us, and we hear things like about crime and things like that, and these are real valid human concerns, and there is no just to ask those communities for greater accountability, I think is not necessarily a constructive framing. I think a constructive framing, and I don't want to. Constructive is not the right word. A pragmatic. I think the most pragmatic approach is to not be like, you guys behave differently, right? Like, but to see what kinds of things could foster a different outcome, in the long term, and have some patience and some tolerance for that, as opposed to, house folks and government people, doing things that don't foster those outcomes, because unfortunately that's a lot of what we see. So for, example, things that foster that are relationships, engaging, like getting to know people, and, just things organically come through that, I find, as opposed to like, you better not do this. For example, on Wood Street, it's widely known in the city of Oakland that there was like a chop shop on Wood Street. The stolen cars, that's where they go, down to Wood Street, and they get cut up and sold, and it's a whole enterprise. And like, that's super complicated. Like, there's so many elements to that. It's like, one, you have house people, leading those criminal enterprises, but relying on unhoused people to do a lot of the dirty work. And those unhoused people, that's part of their sustenance, is to do that, dirty work. And so how do you solve that? Man, it is like, it's so difficult. But the one thing that I saw, that helped is like you had, and Monte could speak to this, much better, but like you had the people on Wood Street who were not doing that, right? And through osmosis, there was, but it was one community. You had the people who were engaged in that, you had the people that were not, but they were all one community and they weren't judging each other. But there was an invitation, an implicit, unspoken invitation to like, you guys, like, maybe there's something else you could do, And the more that energy grew, which I saw it grow dramatically over the course of several years, the more those, downsides, if you want to call it that, can be mitigated. And so, those communities that form side by side with the drug dealing and the, criminal stealing of cars and all that, like, it's like foster the ones that aren't encouraging that, because you can't really just be like, stop it, you guys, don't, because that's that guy's living. That's how he's making his living. So until you can show him some other way to make a living.
Yeah, so like on Wood Street, there was a front street, Wood Street, and then there was a back part of Wood Street, and the back part is where most of the bad elements of the things would happen. In the front part, it was you had expectations. We gave you expectations on the little lot that we were on to stop that element from coming on the front part of the area. That's just for a little, FYI, how we did that. But I wanted to answer your question. You wanted to know, what can you do to bridge the gap? I get it, trust me. I was afraid to go into the encampment myself, and I needed that encampment to live. I needed a place to be. But what you can do is you could reach out to the local boots on the ground organizations that are going to these encampments already, because they've built relationships. They've built relationships with these individuals already. And, go volunteer some time. You can do that. You can go there and just ask them what they might need. Maybe bring garbage bags to them. Something simple. You have to start the engagement. It just has to be created. And the third thing is you can go and advocate for the homeless individuals. We look at everything. We see that, hey, this lady's house, and she's in the city council talking about, give us our rights back. Yeah, give us our rights back. So, there's plenty of things that can be done. What shouldn't be done is leaving it rest right there. What should we do? And it's a us and them situation. It's not. We're all the same. If I was to take away your garbage, your power, you would probably have campfires in your backyard. You would probably have a pile of garbage all throughout your house. Probably couldn't see your house. So we're all the same. We don't have walls and barriers and borders that we can hide behind.
Could I answer that question? So a layer that came to my mind is that a layer that came to my mind is, what part of that conversation would include people who are unhoused but are in so much shame of it for fear of being, retaliation and enforcement and things like that they won't admit to being unhoused. They've found great ways to hide it.
Well, what are you asking? How do they get services? How do they get help?
Say, for example, if I went into a Starbucks and I don't have the money to pay for a coffee, but I'm wearing nice enough clothes and my bag's not all torn up, I look like any other housed person that comes in there. They're not going to bother me about it. And so, like, how would housed communities engage with people who've learned how to hide it well? And when people have learned how to hide it well out of shame, then how do we bridge that gap?
I believe that still starts with the communication. How dare us walk past anything that's alive? I don't care if it's a tree, and don't feel that energy from that item, from that entity, because we all have energy, and it starts with hello. How are you doing?
One more question, or you guys have time?
So as far as like hiding in plain sight or playing housey, you might call it, I feel like, we all are kind of playing a character in some way publicly. Like it's a projection of what we want and the way that we want the world to see us. I feel like you said, the communication is really important, but in and of that act of like hiding in plain sight, trying to pass yourself off as something like that's the stigma has gotten to you to the point where you have even internalized it, if that makes sense. So the fear of belonging to a group that you don't identify with, like, has caused, like, that stigma has then caused you to act accordingly, or to like try to pretend to be, so like you say, I don't want to look unhoused, so I can pass off as housed. And maybe that might in some situations make it easier to navigate, like you say, you're not feeling the same judgment because your bag's not ripped or your clothes are clean. But in reality, that's the stigma that's gotten so far, as that it's been internalized. The way that you, like, I would just say, just realize that that's the stigma, and then try to break that yourself, so that you could feel comfortable engaging, like, from a place of honesty, like where you don't have to feel like you're playing a part or pretending to be something. Because, like, the more you engage with people through honesty, like, yeah, I live in my car, and then they really connect with you, and they're like, wow, this is a really great person that lives in their car. You've changed that person's mind through your example. Like, being an example of what it could be is like the best way to, like, leading by example. So, like, being that example, like, you'd be surprised at how many ways you can lead people just by example. Like, if somebody has an engagement with somebody that's positive, then they're like, oh, wow, like, that opens up their mind to, like, oh, well, maybe somebody living in their car isn't a drug addict that I can't trust around my kids or something. Maybe they see you at the park and their kids love you, and you're like, oh, yeah, by the way, I live in my car. They're like, wow, oh, shoot, my kids are safe around these people. You know what I mean? Like, don't exclude yourself. Don't let the stigma come and don't internalize it. Because, like, the more we perpetuate the stigmas, the harder it is for us to bridge these gaps and communicate with each other. And just remember to be a good example. That's all you can do.
And an awful lot of people, which is why we have all the programs we do that are the institutional models of things, believe that everyone has to have a house. Everyone needs to be in a house. Everybody needs to be in a house. But everybody doesn't need to be in a house. I've traveled a bit myself, and I've been to other countries where there's no law enforcement about people who are, at the end of the day, on their way back to wherever they came from, and they get tired and they throw their Hawaii-o over a tree and put a rock on the other end of it, and that's their shelter for the night or something. We don't allow for any of that here. And it's some of it's circumstantial, some of it's choice, some of it's lifestyle. But we really think that we need to bust that open to where there should be other alternatives for people to live comfortably. And this is at the highest levels. HUD has its rules and how money should be spent. The state has its rules, and Housing and Community Development says how this could go and how that can go. And so options are not available. Alternatives are not available because they won't allow resources, funding to go in that direction. So it comes largely from community when these things happen, which is why community is so vital and important. But we really need to shake that tree and break up some of that stuff so that we can have a more qualitative life for everybody.
Did you want another question?
Thank you all for your perspectives in this conversation. One thing that I'm hearing a lot is about how like systems are broken and this is what we need to do to fix them, right? Like more resources, more bathrooms, parking, this kind of thing. But my question is about more like, and this is my perspective, that the systems aren't broken, but they're working exactly how they're intended to.
Exactly.
And you know, this thought of like, you're either in a grave, you're in a jail, or you're, what was the third one?
A
House, right? I think that the systems that are working exactly how they want the unhoused people in a grave. And I'm wondering, in the conditions that we're living in right now, with rising authoritarianism and fascism, what do we do? Like, what do we do? I mean, I'm hearing a lot about community, and I think that's so important. And I'm wondering if you each want to talk a little bit about that, of like how we can work outside the system to facilitate community and safety.
Sorry. All right. Well, I think you're right. There's been a lot of design in the system to be what it is. It's not that somebody forgot somewhere along the way that it's difficult and it doesn't need to be difficult or overly difficult. So yeah, that I think you're right on that it's not a broken system as much as by design it's flawed. But what was the point I was trying to make? So the anarchist in me and like the activist in me wants to go outside of like if we could just do this without the government, it'd be great. It's not going to happen. Like, we have to realize that like the only way to make progress is to have that support as well. If you look in places where they have tiny home villages, where they have like we could easily say 10 to 20 steps ahead of what we're doing here, it's been the community support from all levels of the community saying we have to make this happen, we have to do something, and making it actionable. And like it's literally been the community support that's made that happen. So it's through community that these things happen in every case. And it's been with support of the government, but it's been because the government has been forced by the people. Like, we will not tolerate you not having this happen. And like the amount of protest, the amount of like community action and like shutting down things and like making it to where like we won't let you go to work until you start dealing with this. Like, it got to the point in Eugene where they literally were like, until you deal with this issue and this issue alone, we won't let you have your council meetings. We won't let you have your government to deal with shit that we don't want you to deal with. This is what we want you to deal with now. And as a community, they stood up and they said, look, this is what we're doing. And they made it, like they forced it, but as a community. And it was with the support of the government. So I don't think that like you can do it outside of the government. You have to work with it, not against it.
Thank you. There's other agencies like Homelessness that actually does operate without the government at all. They have Segurite Trust that they have an agreement that those people, they've built an apartment building by themselves without any state, federal, or government funds. These entities do exist. It is possible, and that's just a few of the ideas that I come to across my mind.
Ryan, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a tension there. I think both are important. I mean, my focus is like, what can communities do? Not waiting on the government, first of all, but the government exists and it has to be engaged with. And you know, I think and maybe this is naive and wishful thinking, but I like to think if communities are doing things that work well, that the government might be like, oh, let's incentivize that. But I recognize that there are reasons that does not always happen, but sometimes it does happen, and like in Portland, they have Dignity Village, which is a community of unhoused people that, design and manage and govern their own community, but they're doing it on city land. The city doesn't provide them any resources other than the land, which is the critical resource. And, it's been happening for 25 years. In Portland, the city government's not like really embraced it, but they also haven't ended it, And so, I'm currently working on a story about what's going on in Portland. And, there's a lot of people in city council that are like, we're spending $40,000 per bed on these government-run tiny home villages. And Dignity Village spends $40,000 per year. Dignity Village spends $1,000 per year of their own money that they generate on site, not taxpayer money. And so this city councilor was like, government should be invested in that, just from an economics perspective, And but you have other city councilors there who are like, no, we can't give all the control to the people because we're in control. And that is the basis of government, right? Like they're supposed to, protect order, restore order and things like that. I mean, that's the idea that government has about itself, but I think there is tension and, being in these communities, kind of turned me into an anarchist because I saw the power of self-governance, it was just really incredible. And it's so inspiring. And, bureaucracies are bureaucracies and they have their role, but they move slow and messy.
Leslie.
Oh, go ahead.
When you talk about systems, sure, in some ways, like we all carry internalized systems with us, right? I mean, we've all, whether known or unknown, we're carrying different, ways of engaging with each other that have been created through the effect of systemic injustice. And, I think on a person-to-person level, we have to unravel that. And I deeply believe in mutual aid and care. And I think that, it's funny, I'm like, oh geez, I'm like the agent of government on this panel or something, right? Which, fair enough, I signed I signed myself up, but also I did sign myself up to be that in some way in this community, and I take it seriously, so I'm not gonna take it off when I'm sitting here, right? I take that role seriously and with as much responsibility as possible. And it exists as a tension in my body for sure. But, I also think that there's a harm in overgeneralizing about systems and about the ways that they push us down or create power over us, because I do think we have the capacity to create our own systems and, sometimes with people in government or with parts of government or with, departments in government, sometimes without, there's certainly so much work that happens outside of government. And, government is the consolidation of tax money, to support people who all live in a place. That's really what it is, and there's a lot of processes that we've inherited that are kind of built on racism, built on systemic injustice, built on capitalism. But also, it is capable of change and being in places of change. And for sure, it moves slowly, for sure, it moves slowly. And, I think that, the more we also, I think, take this as these conversations outside of it's government against people who are unhoused or vice versa, and that it's we're all, there's a lot of people who are in between these spaces who are just average Joe and Joanne citizen, right? And I think that we have to really think about that we have to take the weight of this conversation and kind of build bridges at all levels in order to enact meaningful and long-term change. Because if it sort of like becomes this barrier in which like we all sort of vacate government, right, to the people who seriously are fascist, you know, like then we also have a problem because there's still a huge amount of resource in those spaces. And so I think we have to also be engaging with those spaces as like meaningful areas for change.
We don't necessarily need government support as much as we need them to stay out of our like things that are happening too at times. So it's the control. Like nobody wants to be controlled. I don't think it's like I think we want our freedom. I think we inherently like don't want to feel governed or lorded over. So I think that, you know, it's if the government, whether locally or more on a macro scale, can't support things that are happening in a community, I think it's the government's should know when to stay out of things and not like hold things back because of the red tape and the process of it being slow. If something can happen without that being slowed down or hindered by local or other governments, I think that's important, that we should be allowed to do these things without interference from our government.
I think it comes back to the trust issue, really. For me, that's what it is. Because there have been lots of good examples, lots of good proposals, lots of things that have been put forward. But here's the way I framed it when we were working with the planning department for a lot of the public policies that we worked on. Government's role, the planning commission's role, the supervisors, the leadership, is to create policy. And what we're trying to do is create community. And those don't work a lot of the time together. And so the idea of government staying out of what you want to do is not really very likely if you want to do something that's in the confines of the city limit, for example. They're going to want to control what you're doing. And even if it's on private property, we've been told we cannot do any of these things unless it is on private property. So that puts another layer of stuff in terms of permitting and what you can do on property and so forth. But I guess the point is there isn't really a lot of option to just trust and let something happen that you can't control or to step away from control.
I think we gotta ask ourselves, like, why is it so? I'm the person talking right now. Someone sent me the microphone a little bit ago. I've been sitting patiently with it. I think we got to ask ourselves, like, why is it so difficult to imagine doing these things without the government, right? And it's because if the government doesn't like what we're doing, they have the government sanctioned right to show up with police and guns and put you and all your friends in jail under threat of violence. You know, they have the power of state violence. And it is because of that, like, it's not just like an ideological luxury, I think, to think that like we have to figure out a way to do it without government, or to reimagine government in a way that is not hierarchical, but it is like an absolute kind of ethical necessity. And like, we're not going to be able to do it. It's like self-limiting otherwise. But you know, if we are thinking about it structurally, we've talked about the problem. In my mind, the problem is that we live inside of a system in which, you know, like private property rights are prioritized over human life. We live in racial capitalism. We live in a settler colonial society. We live in a social order in which our values as human beings are tied to our ability to produce an economically viable product. And that just shouldn't be the case. You know, we have a right to things simply because we need them. And, you know, capitalism, racial capitalism, these systems of oppression, they need homelessness to exist as a form of labor discipline. Like, there's, you know, the difficulties of living on the street, the trauma of it all, the immiseration of it, so much of that is the product of state violence. And that is because it is the system of coercion that capitalism like depends upon in order to keep people going to freaking work. And, we're talking about this tension between kind of like self-governed grassroots initiatives and things like that, and working within side of city council governments. Things are extremely dire here locally right now. I know they're dire everywhere, but I feel like that needs to be said within a local context. And so much of it has to do with the fact that there seems to be a consensus in our local city governments, as is the case, pretty much everywhere in government, I think, within the United States, that like the tourism is a good thing. And how do we bring tourism? Well, we displace people. We kick them out of their homes every single day. Humboldt is like a depressed Rust Belt economy. Cannabis industry has collapsed. Logging is kind of like a shell of what it once was, even though it's entirely ravaging what is left of the very like small portion of once really, really beautiful forest. But I'm rambling. But anyways, the point is like the city of Arcata is contracting, I think it's like an $80,000 contract with Civic Engagement, which is the consulting firm which laid the legal framework for Johnson v. Grants Pass. They laid the legal framework to make it legal to lock someone up in a cell, in a cage, for lying down on the sidewalk. So many of my friends have been kicked out of their homes because the city of Arcata wants a more, quote, cohesive community and is trying to gentrify Arcata through the Gateway Plan. Like the back 40, these are these fields kind of on the outskirts of town, which are extremely heavily polluted by old logging practices. And for a long time, about 20 years, they were like a relatively stable place for people to be. Those places, they were evicted about 4 months ago now, and it's because the city wants to build,
High
rises there and turn those areas into parks. So we have to think about like, what are the actual motivations of the government here, right? And it's to bring tourism, it's to resuscitate a depressed economy. And what does that mean for all of us? It means state violence. It means displacing people, erasing people, kicking people out of their homes, leaving disabled elderly women who cannot walk to sit on the sidewalk because the bus that they were living in just got towed. This is something that happened like 3 days ago in Arcata. But yeah, every time a sweep happens, it's a threat to every single one of us. It's a way of saying that if you don't go to work, if you don't sell your time in order to make money, in order to buy a house, because we live in this fucked up system of like housing commodification, then this is what's going to happen to you.
You're not going to decommodify them. You're not going to do that. They'll lose their position.
Right now?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, I say what an extraordinary conversation. I am so grateful. And but I also want to say, I think the question we have to have in our minds, given there's so much wisdom here and so much life experience, what do all of you think we need to do to maximize this conversation to the utmost degree, so that together, what ways can we come together to make it a reality, the kind of living situation that you described? And I just have to put in a picture, I wouldn't be I, that I've been a witness to what AHA has done. And Nezzy is an extraordinary, what people don't realize, I think, is that, yeah, she doesn't want me to talk about it. But really, they have gone to the government and changed public policy so that now there is a tiny home village ordinance that allows for a tiny home, and we have it on record in video, said that it, Ford said that it allows for the tiny home village similar to Opportunity Village. But the question becomes, what does it take to make that happen? And I think we have it in us, but we don't know that. And I think we have to call upon the Minnesota strong, approach. And so I think that, what would that take? And I think really a beginning is to go to an AHA meeting, because they have had a track record of changing policy. And in terms of your description of the encampments, Andrew Heben went and visited in a similar manner that you did, And he identified the dynamics, the approaches, the relationships, and incorporated them into Opportunity Village. So it might not be all that you would want. Maybe it's more formal than you might want, but we have that potential. And I think that it would be tragic if we didn't find a way to come together and move forward and maximize the dreams and reality. And I just have to put in, Cal Matters has said that living outside is a slow death sentence. And routinely at AHA, we get the coroner's log, like for 2025, the average age of death of people outside was 44.9 years. And when you take the life expectancy, which partnership identified as 77.2 years, it means that the average number of years that people lose to the homelessness is 32.3 years. And I have found public officials don't want to hear it. They don't want to look at it. And so just in summary, I want to say that unfortunately, I think the public narrative is really forceful, saying that if you want a place, there is shelter. The statistics deny that, because the point in time, the most recent verified ones said that there were 1,194 people living outside in conditions not fit for human habitation. And there are 379 sheltered. So in other words, the reality is we need something alternative, and we have the vision, and we have the talk, and we have the insight. But what I think AHA has done habitually is they know how to take that vision and translate it into a reality. So I'm just making a pitch. I hope you'll go to those meetings, and together we can change the world that we're living in. And I guess my question is, how do you think we can come together and make these things happen and not go beyond the discussion?
I agree with the meetings things. I mean, town hall meetings, the AHA meetings, the town hall, the town hall meetings, the AHA meetings, any meeting that you can go to that this conversation can continue. That the power is in numbers, not the other way around. I'm not going to talk about numbers because, as far as numbers go, the people that are dying are people like me. And so I don't really want to get into the numbers because that'll hurt me right now.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their own area of, resources to do something, right? Like each person can go at it in a different way. For me personally as a journalist, it's writing books and making films and that sort of thing. But also, I just will give a little, I'll use my moment here to make a plug, but, and tell a small story at the same time. But my wife and I have property here in Humboldt County, and one of the ideas that we had with that property is sharing it with the community, including the unhoused community, because land is a tremendous resource. And I said this publicly in the media a few months ago, and particularly in relationship to maybe unhoused folks could in some way benefit from having access to this land. I'll just make it simple. And there was this incredible backlash. There's this whole thing that happened on Facebook that I didn't even find out about until a couple months later, when I got a letter from County Code Compliance saying, "What's this homeless shelter that you're building out there?" And I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, there's no, it doesn't exist, we're just doing some gardening here." And, but it turned out, that just hundreds of people, like it was this viral Facebook post accusing us of helping the homeless. And, it was all go back to the big city and take your homeless people with you and stuff like that. And just the hysteria, literally just from uttering that word and suggesting that, unhoused people could access land that they weren't currently accessing. It was just, and I should have known. I mean, it shouldn't be that surprising, but it makes me want to, say that word more, and talk to those people who went crazy on Facebook and be like, hey, like, I'm not sure what you're envisioning in your mind, but here's the reality, and it's not so scary, it's like that we just invent these demons sometimes. And so I think it's really important to talk to the people who are afraid, because it ultimately is fear, and to not really judge them either, to not talk down to them, but to talk level with them and be like, hey, like, here's my experience, here's what I know to be true, and then what do you think? And like, how can we like have some common ground here? And so like, I had to call my county supervisor, who was like the one, instigating this code complaint, and be like, why didn't you just like call me up? Like my contact information is publicly available. Like, why did you go to county code enforcement rather than just talk to me, and you would have found out, no, we're not building a homeless shelter there. So, and my plug is that next weekend we're inviting the whole community, whether housed or unhoused, doesn't really matter, to our place for the first time. It's a garden that we've been building outside of Ferndale. We call it Lost Coast Gardens, and something we've been working towards for a year is to be able to get to that point where we can invite the community. And so there's some flyers out there on the table if you want to come. Going to be all sorts of great local music and food and just hanging out. I also know it's way past the time that we were gonna. So should we maybe one more, and then Jerry is gonna close with the poem.
All right. Well, I just would like to say that this has really been everything that has been mentioned tonight is really everything that I have encountered. I did a documentary series a few years ago called Homeless in Humboldt. A lot of you may have heard of it. It's on YouTube, and I just wanted to say, among other things, that I came from an area in the Bay Area where homelessness was. I came from Burlingame, where homelessness is shoved off to the side. Like you just don't see it. And so coming here, I just want to say, was quite a culture shock. But what I've come to realize is not only are these unhoused folks really incredible individuals, but like you said, like you guys said, but also that they are a part of the community. They are not below us, even if that's what the message is being forced to us. I just really do. So I agree with all of you in recognizing the value of unhoused folks, no matter what form it takes. I guess my question is, what do you say about the folks who, there's a number of folks, I would think dozens, maybe, hundreds of people that live in the Arcata Community Forest, either by choice or whatever. I guess, what do you think about those people? I mean, not to say that they're any different than, or they're worse than someone who's living behind the Bayshore Mall, but like, that's kind of a nuance there. I'm just curious, like, what your thoughts on how to treat them, what to think about them, or just stuff like that. Yeah, that'd be my question.
Like people, this is the thing too, like, it's hard to be making a blanket statement about anything, or to be a voice that's supposed to tell people how people think or feel or whatever. I can really only speak from my own experience, and I have encountered people in the community forest in Arcata on different occasions, and I've found that there's a huge spectrum a very broad spectrum of people that are there, from kids that are traveling doing house concerts to people that have, they want to be hermits that never see anybody else. So I would say if you have fear or something that keeps you from interacting with them, then bring someone with you. Or if you think something's very dangerous, then don't broach that. But I think it's really important that we all just kind of work with what we have. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it's a huge variation of people, just like people in houses. People unhoused have a huge variation too. And I know we have to wrap this up. I wonder if we maybe could have just a moment for each person to just close their.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'll start by closing my thing, and then I'll pass it on. Thank you all for coming. I think it's really important that we have this conversation and we keep it going. We're having a conversation at the community level with folks that are unhoused too, and would like to merge that into something where we can all participate. We, as a completely voluntary organization, we're all volunteers. We have one person we pay, that's our driver for the caravan. But we need volunteers in order to do these things and create meetings and hold space and have people come and bring food and do different things. We need people to participate who want to do that. So if you want to volunteer, go online, fill out a form, let us know that that's what you want to do. We'll follow up. And we have other activities. We have a quarterly housing forum, and we have the monthly meetings. We also have all kinds of other things like the caravan and other direct services or outreach. So, but we need help with the admin stuff, writing grants, because we do that with local foundations and so forth. Anyway.
How do they reach you?
What?
How do they reach you?
Oh, you can reach us by, there's our table right here. There's cards, business cards with the number on it. There's also brochures. It's really easy. It's just humco.org, and that's it. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
I'd just like to thank everybody for being here and taking the time to come out and join us for this. We all have other things going on in life. It takes sacrifice. Like the first sacrifice is our time to get together. So thanks for being here and a part of this. And, I look forward to seeing you guys at more community engagements in the future.
It's been a treat to converse with you all and such thoughtful, informed people, experienced people. What I'm thinking about right now is that, I am definitely kind of an opportunist when it comes to resources. I do believe in what are the resources that are available, whether they're in government, whether they're in the bodies of people with lived experience, and let's get together and share them to address what is possible to address. Acknowledging that sometimes we all have to also work in other spaces, but when we can harness resources, I really think, the housing that's getting built in Eureka, I acknowledge that it's part, there's some really big developer systems around that housing too, and also, this is 300 more units than we're going to have, after 10 years than we didn't have before of low income, very affordable housing, that will allow people to save money. Again, it's not the only solution, nor should it be, but that, let's not leave resources out of the picture if they're there, but then also let's acknowledge the gems of resources that are in the bodies and people in our community who have experiences that we may or may not share.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming, and come visit us next weekend. We can talk more. Next Sunday, June 28th, we're having the grand opening of the Lost Coast Gardens from 12 to 4. And the other small plug I'll make, so we've been doing these discussions all over the country. This is like the 23rd event we've done with folks from Wood Street Commons. There's usually 3. Only Monte could come today, but we have a GoFundMe campaign going to cover the travel expenses for the folks from Wood Street Commons to make this possible. So there's a QR code. If you're able to, please contribute, and hope to see you around.
I would just say engage both the individuals and sweep skills. That's my motto.
Thank you for that. Everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for engaging. Please keep these issues and these thoughts in your mind as you go around your day, go through the community, attend events, talk to people, spread that spark, respect the spark, and small plug also on my end. If you're curious to see interviews that we've conducted locally, you can find those at Humboldt Freelance Reporting on YouTube. Okay, and that's all I've got.
This is way high for me. Jerry, come on up. For those of you that don't know Jerry, he's a venerable poet and a wonderful long-term member of the community who's amazing.
Thank you, Nessie. Thank you for bringing us all together. This poem comes from the edge of the bay, beyond the edge of the bay, called Elk River Spit or Hickshawry Spit, a little sliver of land. When you're pushed to the edge, beyond the edge, where we've kept this problem. Belongings. At the end of the land, there's a spring. A homeless guy lived there, beside a pond between Elk River and Humboldt Bay. He had a cat. 10,000 years ago, the ice still melting, the ocean still miles away. Legend says the spring was already here. Then in a great earthquake, it sank and was covered by the bay. Now it comes up through this narrow spit of ocean sand and the mud of a century and a half of logging. It's no Walden Pond. The stone's throw wide, fringed by cattail, willow, myrtle. Frogs, raccoons, and summer blackbirds also shelter here. Jimmy toughed it out for a couple of years, cut back willows with an axe, shoveled sand against the December tides. In a battered aluminum boat, he ferried Eureka's cast-off treasure to his little outpost, an American flag flying from the big black pipe that vents the city's sewage outfall into the bay. Home is the place we keep our belongings. He lived in a Kmart tent on this sinking sand beside a freshwater pond, floating on a rising sea. Folks tried to help him, showed him woodcraft, how to smoke the perch he caught. Someone even tried to rescue his cat, meowing in the willows. Messages in chalk began appearing on the paved waterfront trail. Do not take cat. Cat not homeless. When the cat disappeared again and didn't come back, he got 2 pit bulls that mauled some dog walkers and had to be put down. This brought him to the attention of the authorities, and then he was gone, taken care of. Car batteries, tons of trash remained, the flag in the southerly breeze. Eventually, people cleaned it up. Rangers, beach walkers, a new homeless guy named Tex. Maybe this redeemed a little our failure to do for the man what the man tried to do for a cat. It will take time for the pond to recover. It may go under, or it might keep rising from the bay. Home is belongings to hope, to one another, to improbable places. At the end of the land, there is a spring. Thank you all.